Consumer marketing lessons from B2B communication. Now this is thoughtful. Hello, I'm Kitty Boo in Shanghai. Business-to-business or B2B companies have a reputation for being boring marketers, which is not entirely fair. Firms like Cisco, Intel, and Agilent have developed campaigns using humor and social media that have won fans with consumers as well as award festivals. More importantly, there's a lot that consumer marketers should be learning today from B2B communication. With the rise of smartphones, tablets, and social media, it's not only possible to engage consumers on a one-to-one basis now, it's imperative that they try to reach niche customer groups with targeted messages. That's something B2B companies are very good at. This week on Thoughtful China, our experts, Kevin Gentle, Leland Lai, and Ming Yo, will tell you how the best B2B marketers reach consumers today. And Lydia Li will share a thought or two about the social tools that help B2B marketers today. But first with us today is Narelle Hicks, the Shanghai-based Managing Director of Axiom's operation in Southeast Asia. Narelle, welcome to our studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
I know you're with the company called Axiom. Tell us a little bit about your company for viewers who may not be familiar with it.
Sure. Axiom is an enterprise data analytics and software as a service company. So our main mantra is really to help company to connect and make sense out of the data. So we see ourselves as a data connector. Really, the main proposition is to help business to unleash the potential, to fulfill the business potential. So this is what we are about.
Make smarter business decisions.
Absolutely.
With the data. So how important is marketing for you in the region?
Marketing is important for all company. I suppose we can also consider ourselves as a B2B marketer because we are also selling our solution to big enterprise. So typically we talk about B2B marketing. It's all about finding the right target and providing the right solution to them. So when we do marketing, we also follow the principle of generating the right leads and how can we nurture them so that they can come to become a good business partner to us.
You've been doing B2B campaigns for a while now, now with Axiom, and before I think you were with Publicis and Ogilvy One. What do you think is the best practice?
Best practice, it's all about targeting and the good use of data. Because I think for B2B marketing, very often, the key focus have been on finding the right target. Because, for enterprise solution, it's normally a very long kind of decision-making process. It's also multi-stakeholder, unlike B2C, whereby normally you are the only decision maker, or maybe your wife, your husband. But in the case of an enterprise solution, very often there are the CEO involved, maybe CFO, and then with IT director. So it's multi-stakeholder. So in terms of B2B marketing, it's really to have a good practice of understanding how can you articulate the different messaging, cater to the different kind of stakeholder and make sure that you have the right kind of solution that's going to fit into their marketing needs or their business need. So that understanding of the tailored messaging and how do you nurture that relationship is important.
Well, B2C marketing has seen a lot of changes in the past years, with social media and the digital platform, for example. And have you seen the same amount of changes in B2B marketing?
Absolutely. When I first worked on, the very first B2B campaign actually is for IT and technology company. So in those days, there's a lot of focus on lead generation. So very often, client would be looking for the right list or brokers or kind of like target, and then they will invite them to their industry event, generate leads, and then the sales will follow through. So a lot of the focus have been on, lead generation and the traditional database marketing. What I see the same type of company, and I use the same example, like IT and, like a tech solution provider. So they are still targeting the enterprise, but the way that how they use digital media is also quite similar to the B2C world. There are also the use of social media, but perhaps less on, focusing on the like and, how many fans I've got. They're more focusing on the relationship they build with the community.
And maintaining that.
And maintaining that and nurturing that. And you can imagine, the kind of community a CFO will go to versus the CMO will be quite different community. And for marketer who can, do it in a very, smart way, they will have the different kind of like the enterprise solution messages, communicate to these different stakeholders through the different community in a very dynamic manner. So I think the same, how social is being used, it's been seen to be used in the B2B world, and there are some pretty good cases going forward. Yeah.
What are some of the common mistakes marketers make when it comes to B2B marketing?
I still see that there's quite a handful, a lot of B2B marketers are still focusing very much on lead generation, and there is not enough energy and effort in focusing on the nurturing part. I mentioned earlier on in earlier days, very much depending on the salespeople, once they get the leads, and then they will carry on through the kind of selling process. And but nowadays with social media, there are kind of different way and angle for them to communicate to this stakeholder, not necessarily in a very hard sell and salesy way. The use of community is one example of how they can, dynamically, leveraging, new medium to communicate. But this nurturing part is still something that not everybody have been, mastering it, and I think there's still room for them to explore what's the best way. I've seen a company who are also becoming a bit of a content provider. As you can see, when you are selling enterprise solution, basically you are selling your thought leadership in that particular area. So, the way how you, kind of like, becoming a thought leaders, and therefore, your content and how you're gonna, use that in a very smart way, but not in a very sales heart-driven way, is a fine balance. So I think not everybody is doing it in the most perfect sense yet. So there's definitely money room for them to kind of improve in that area. So I would say nurturing is the part where there's most opportunities still, untapped in terms of how we can do it better.
And what do you think B2C companies could learn from B2B companies when it comes to marketing?
Interestingly, I think nurturing. Because when you think about B2C communication, when you talk to a big brand, they are very much focusing on a lot of creativity and also on content and creating that connection. But very often it's like a one-off. You can see
it's very like campaign by campaign, one-off, event-based.
But when you think about for brands who are doing it well, it's really understand the relationship the brand is building with the consumer. So the lack of social media should not be just a one-way communication platform whereby you are just, using it to push out a lot of promotion or campaign, which a lot of brands are still doing.
True.
But at the same time, if they are, being very smart, the same platform where they are sometimes pushing out communication could be the same platform where they're getting feedback for them to learn more about the consumer, about the footprint, what they're interested in, get a lot more understanding. And the principle of B2B marketing is really get really deep into the skin of what the stakeholder are looking for in the solution. Even for buying a simple thing like a skincare product or something like your clothing and everything. I mean, this same principle can still be applied to the B2C marketing. I think that's one area that they could actually take some thought about, the nurturing process.
Well, Narelle, thanks for coming in today.
Thank you.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, and then we'll hear a thought or two from Lydia Li, Senior VP of Weber Shandwick China's technology practice.
Now, let's go!
We do see more B2B companies embracing social media, but fear and uncertainty reigns because it is not a controlled environment for most of them. And without proper training, these platforms can create additional troubles. That being said, we at Weber Shandwick recommend that for all B2B companies to have the right tools and attitude. And I can summarize it as the B2B social media gear. Much like the gear you wear when you go out and climb a mountain and try to reach the final destination, you need 4 key gears. Number 1, maps. For us, we mean that we analyze the existing social platforms and social platforms that you have. Sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Just make the existing wheel run faster. Also, take a look at what your audience is already using and align them properly. And finally, check out what your competitors are doing. It will give you a sense of what's out there and what to expect. The second gear, a compass. By this, we mean content. Content is needed to fully take advantage of the social platforms, and an editorial calendar is highly needed. Use graphics, photos, videos to explain complex stuff instead of just pure text. The third gear, we call it utility belt, with a lot of tools inside. What we mean is that social media is all about engagement, not a one-way street message delivery. So proper community management skills and protocols to handle possible conflicts or issues need to be in place. Finally, a view from the top, or we call it binoculars. Don't wait for a monthly review, but actively listen to your audiences on a daily basis and measure the impact. Adjust your strategy accordingly, and this should be done within hours sometimes. Most importantly, in order for business-to-business companies to really succeed in leveraging social platforms, the company from top to bottom need to be aligned, agreed on a strategy. And please do not panic if you receive not so good comments from time to time. The key thing is to have an honest and engaging attitude with your key audiences. Proper communication will resolve any differences, and social platforms are just another channel.
Thanks, Lydia. We're in the studio today with Kevin Gentle, Digital Strategy Director at LabBrand, Ming Yo, China Country Manager at YouGov, and Leland Lai, Managing Director, Asia at GSMA. Welcome to our studio today. We're talking about B2B marketing today. In your opinion, what are some of the companies that are doing particularly a good job in this field?
Well, I think there's a very prominent example. There's the example of Intel Inside. It's a great example of how B2B brand, that does not sell directly to customers, can create brand equity with end consumers to gain leverage when negotiating with all the PC manufacturers. And also, I think we're going to show a video later on of how Intel manages to market its brand and company to end consumers. So I think that's a pretty good example, albeit an old one, but still a very relevant one.
We are Intel, sponsors of tomorrow.
Yeah, that's the one I would have named. That's almost probably in anybody's memory. That was the very first vivid memory for anybody, Intel Inside.
B2B companies have a reputation for being very boring for marketers, but there are some great examples to show that they can also be edgy, sexy, and compelling. Give us some examples.
So I can think of some in the pharmaceutical space. We work with a lot of pharmaceutical manufacturers, and ultimately the majority of their clientele or revenue comes from the industry, so healthcare practitioners. The end consumers, ultimately the user of the product, but they're not necessarily the purchaser from the brand. And so what we see is that there needs to be a focused and targeted message and communication both to healthcare practitioners, but also keeping in mind how the consumer looks at a product or service or treatment. And there are emotional triggers often behind this purchase or usage of a treatment. And we see that resonates both with consumer as well as the healthcare practitioner.
An example that I love, because it's so counterintuitive, is Maersk. So Maersk is a Danish driller and shipping and banking conglomerate. So it's just about the most boring company you can imagine. And yet they have a social media presence that's very impressive, because you can see that they segmented each building block of a digital presence extremely well according to who they want to reach. So if you go to the Facebook page, the Facebook page has about 2-3 million fans. I mean, for a shipping company, because although the industry is very boring, it's visually very impressive. Super tankers are very impressive. All drilling platforms are very impressive. So they have a legitimately great presence on Instagram. I follow them on Instagram, and what they post is very impressive, even if you know absolutely nothing about the shipping industry. And sitting alongside that, you have the boring blogs about containers and shipping, etc. But even the things that are really targeted at professionals are actually really sexy for the end consumer. For example, you can take a virtual tour of one of the super tankers, which is very relevant both for B2B buyers and for the average Joe like me, who's just like trying to figure out how this company works. So I think it's a great example of how a company for a very boring business can make the best out of its assets and have a digital presence that's both relevant and sexy.
And then there's the granddaddy of B2B marketing that ended up targeting consumers, Intel Inside in recent memory. Semiconductor industry is perhaps boring. Their customers would be the computer manufacturers, but in theory, Intel would never touch the consumer-facing side, but yet this Intel Inside campaign actually worked itself way into the store shelves and influencing customer purchasing decision, which in turn then influenced the computer manufacturers, which semiconductor companies go with. So that's a pretty vivid example.
Just to bounce back on that, actually, in a lot of projects we've done for B2B brands, we consistently see that even though customers do not buy certain products, B2B products, they still matter. They still care about what enters into the fabrication process, and B2B buyers consistently say that having brand equity and having approval from end customers is a significant factor that influences which provider they're going to choose.
I think from my perspective, we come from a research space, and the point of the research that we conduct is really to help companies and brands understand their consumers or clients. And from that perspective, I can't speak about sexy or not, but it's all about understanding your customer and having a value proposition that's relevant, right? So whether it's to consumer or to industry, I think that's the same.
What do you think are some of the lessons that B2C marketers can take from B2B marketers as they increasingly have to reach consumers on a one-to-one basis?
Well, B2B marketing typically is, you can think of it as narrowcast, more one-to-one, if you will. B2C traditionally has been kind of a broadcast, casting a very wide net. But as technology and connectivity allow us, either by mobile, by internet, and much better analytics and big data, we now can, B2C can learn from B2B on the more first narrowcast and later on one-on-one marketing.
I think what we do is that we do digital strategy for both B2B and B2C brands, and we actually see that there's kind of a convergence of what B2B brands and B2C brands are doing, and each can learn from the others. For example, B2B has historically been about being very targeted and being very goal-oriented. It's really about trying to improve performance all along the sales funnels, so number of leads, closing time, etc. And before digital and before big data, that was very hard to achieve for B2C brands, because B2C brands deal with huge populations, deal with aggregates. But now these new big data tools and new online digital marketing tools allow B2C to take a page from the B2B playbook in making content much more personalized and having a much more goal-oriented approach to marketing. On the other side, as we've seen, B2B brands are exploring forms of content and forms of interaction with the consumers that were until now the domain of B2C.
I would have to agree. One of the big things that we've been working on for a lot of our clients is putting in the proper metrics to evaluate marketing spends and advertising spends, and that's something that we're seeing definitely carry through from the B2B space to the B2C, so making sure that you have the right performance metrics.
Let's turn it around. Social media has led to greater demand in terms of content from consumers, and also you guys have the KOLs coming out now, right? So what should B2B companies be learning from B2C companies?
I think Kevin touched upon it a little bit, just I think the B2C marketing experts are traditionally very in tune with the emotions of the consumers, the purchase impulse, and it turns out, as the study shows, the B2B purchasing decision actually is not too different.
I think there's something that B2B brands can learn, that is reactivity. because I mean, live marketing is something that's very hard right now in the B2C scene, as actually, and as B2B buyers rely more and more on social networks, so be they mainstream professional to find information about brands and products, being very reactive in pushing new types of content that really match what buyers are expecting right now, that really kind of can serve key market trends. That reactivity is something that B2B brands should really be injecting into their strategy, and something in which they can draw inspiration from what B2C brands are doing.
B2C brands are traditionally seen as having the upper hand because they connect with consumers on a very emotional level sometimes. Is it appropriate or even advisable for B2B brands to try this approach too and form more of this emotional contacts, these connections?
I think it boils down to what the customer wants, and the foundation of any B2B or B2C strategy, but I think especially important in B2B, is to have a mapping of a buyer journey. So at each stage, how do people look information, and what is most likely to influence people? And then based on that, you know at each stage if people want content that's more emotional or content that's more about the facts and objectivity. So it ultimately depends on what you see your customers doing. And again, that whole attention that's given to the customer journey is something else in which B2B brands can learn from B2C brands.
Absolutely. I'd like to add to that. In addition to the drivers behind a purchase, there are actually also barriers that sometimes are linked to emotion as well within the buying process or related to the product or service as well. And so understanding absolutely that customer journey and mapping that out is essential, both in B2B and B2C.
I think something that brands must understand is that B2B brands are about somebody who works in a company forwarding his own goals.
That's right. It's not really just facing this company. It really boils down to an individual or a group of individuals.
Exactly. So if me, as a consultant, I'm looking for a provider, let's say a social media analytics provider, ultimately this provider must serve me, must serve my career. And these are goals that are deeply emotional, and they're not just practical.
It still gets down to a purchasing decision.
Kevin, Ming, Leland, thanks for coming to Thoughtful China today. That wraps it up for today. Be sure to subscribe to us on Youku, Tudo, and YouTube. You can also follow us on Weibo, WeChat, and Twitter, and join our LinkedIn group. See you again.